She had thought it was just another shift, another day of quiet service, tired smiles, and whispered prayers that things could get better. But the moment she stepped toward the corner table, everything changed. The old man she'd been serving for months wasn't the problem. It was the man who walked in behind him, the one whose eyes held judgment as if he'd seen it all before, all her life. What transpired in the next few minutes would not only try her patience, but expose a truth far bigger than the restaurant walls. And the real question is, why did nobody stop him? It was like any other morning for her. She arrived early, tied her apron, and breathed in the familiar sense of fresh coffee and biscuit dough warming in the kitchen. This small diner had become her refuge, a place where she tried to keep her head down, work hard, and build something better for herself. Most customers barely noticed her, but she had learned to live with that. She moved through the room with quiet efficiency, offering the same patient kindness she wished the world would show her. At the far corner sat the elderly man who came in every day, frail, gentle, and slow-moving. He reminded her of the grandfather whom she lost too soon. Helping him had become a silent routine, something softening the weight she carried from the outside world. She brought him warm tea before he asked, adjusted his chair when he struggled, and listened when his trembling hands seemed to say more than his voice ever could. But beneath the routine, there was always a tension she could never shake. The stares, the whispered assumptions, the customers who looked through her, or worse looked at her with something colder than indifference. She learned to swallow it, bury it, keep moving. Yet, as she cleaned his table that morning, there was something in the air that felt different. He looked nervous, uneasy, almost as if he knew something she didn't. And she had no idea that the moment the door opened behind her, everything in her life was about to shift. The bell above the diner door shook more furiously than it usually did, breaking the soft clatter of plates and murmured conversations. She didn't immediately look up. She was intent on steadying the old man's shaking hands as he reached for his cup. It was the way he suddenly shifted his gaze, the sudden tightening of his shoulders with silent fear, that made her turn. A young man stood at the entrance, sharp suit, expensive watch, a confidence bordering on arrogance. His gaze swept around the room as if he owned it. And then they fell upon her, not with curiosity, not with confusion, but something colder, something that made her chest tighten, entitlement mixed with disdain. He walked toward them with slow, deliberate steps. The old man's breathing became shallow. Instinctively, she reached out a reassuring hand and laid it on the back of his chair, as if grounding him would somehow ground her too. The young man didn't acknowledge the diners around him. He went straight to the corner table there, table end, stopped just inches from her. She could feel the heat in his stare like a spotlight, one meant to expose and belittle her. He didn't need to say a word. His face said it all. It was the same look she had seen 1,000 times, the one which silently asked, "What are you doing touching someone like him?" The one that questioned her intentions, her character, her very presence. She stepped backward, allowing the elderly man space, but the youth's eyes continued to follow her like some sort of instruction. Conversations died around them. Forks froze in midair. The diner, once warm and familiar, now felt like a stage where everyone watched her, waiting for her reaction. The old man weakly raised his hand, trying to introduce her, trying to soothe the moment, but in one quick, sharp tilt of the head, the young man dismissed it. His lips curled an expression between superiority and accusation. The message was easily read. He didn't need her help. He didn't want her near him, and she had crossed a line simply by caring. Her throat tightened, but she stood her ground. She had survived worse than a hateful stare. Still, something about the silence around her, the lack of defense from the people she served every day, made the moment heavier. No one moved. No one spoke. They watched as if waiting for her to shrink away, like that was the natural order of things. And then the young man leaned slightly toward his grandfather, whispering something she couldn't hear. But she saw the old man's face crumple. Shame, helplessness, pain, not because of her, but because of him. Only then did she realize that the young man was not just trying to protect status. He was protecting an image one in which someone like her had no place showing kindness or humanity. The air thickened. Her palms went cold. She could feel judgment tightening around her like a rope. And just when she thought the moment couldn't get worse, the young man straightened, took a step closer to her, and prepared to do something that would turn a quiet morning into a storm she never saw coming. The next few seconds would decide everything. The young man's voice cut through the diner like a blade. Sharp, loud, and meant to wound. He didn't yell at his grandfather. He didn't ask what was happening. He pointed at her, accusing, condemning, as if she had committed some unforgivable crime by simply helping an old man stand. His words were harsh, humiliating, laced with a venom that caused her heart to drop into her stomach. The customers around them stiffened, feigning not to hear, feigning not to see. But silence has a sound, and in that moment it was deafening. Every pair of eyes in that room fell on her, not with sympathy, but with that familiar, quiet judgment that said, maybe she deserved it. The old man tried to speak, his frail voice shaking, trying to rectify the story his grandson was trying to create. But the young man didn't let him, shutting him down with a firm hand on his shoulder, a gesture screaming control more than concern. Then, turning back to her, he stepped closer, invading the small space she had left. She felt the room get smaller. Her ribs tightened, her breath shortened. She wasn't just being confronted, she was being cornered. His next words weren't just insulting. They were designed to erase her humanity and strip away her dignity in front of every single person in that diner. He painted her as a threat, as someone taking advantage, as someone who shouldn't be near their family. He didn't care that it wasn't true. He cared that people would believe him. And for a terrifying moment, they did. The old man's hand shook violently, not from age, but from heartbreak. His eyes implored her to understand something he could not say out loud. Months and months, he had been accepting her kindness, only to watch his own flesh and blood weaponize her skin against her. Her throat burned. Her hands trembled. She wanted to walk away, to disappear. But then the young man leaned in just enough for her to hear the words meant only for her, words so full of quiet, practiced hatred that they froze her where she stood. The diner fell silent. The old man collapsed into a fit of coughs. And in that split second, she realized this wasn't just cruelty, this was a moment that would alter all of their lives. Because what went down next would reveal all. The coughing fit shook the old man so violently that the entire diner finally snapped out of its silence. Chairs scraped. Someone gasped. And for the first time since the confrontation began, she didn't hesitate, she moved. Not because the young man allowed it, not because anyone else stepped forward, but because compassion was stronger than fear. She steadied the old man, helped him breathe, guided him into a safer position. And in those few seconds, something shifted. His grandson stepped back, shaken, not by guilt, but by the undeniable truth that everyone could now see. The person he tried to shame was the only one showing real humanity. In the aftermath, the manager rushed over, customers began to whisper, and the facade that the young man had built of superiority, of authority, began to crumble under the weight of his own cruelty. He tried to defend himself, but the room wasn't with him anymore. For once, people saw him for what he was, and they saw her for who she truly was. The old man's breathing steadied, his eyes brimming with sorrow, as he reached for her hand, a silent apology, a plea for forgiveness, a quiet acknowledgement of injustice he had been witness to, even within his own family. She didn't answer in anger. She didn't yell or accuse. She merely pulled him to his feet and walked him out, leaving behind that young man, those diners, and the weight of every unspoken prejudice that had hung in the air moments before. But the moment didn't stay in that room. It stayed with her, stayed with every witness who knew just how easily they might have remained silent, and it stayed with the young man, now forced to confront the fact that the world had seen him clearly, perhaps for the first time. It wasn't just a story about a diner. It was the story of how fast hate can contort a simple act of kindness, and how easily silence can become complicity. So, the question becomes, if you had been standing in that diner, watching it unfold, would you have spoken up? Or would you have stayed silent like everybody else?